Dear chess friends, for the entire afternoon I've been following the game of Hans Niemann. He's playing with the white pieces against Polish Grandmaster Mateusz Bartel. The big question of course is if Hans is able to bounce back from that painful loss yesterday. Today, a new chance, a new day. But look what is happening in an absolute dramatic game. Make sure to watch the video till the very end. In the meantime, subscribe to the channel and I will show you what happened. Hans played 1e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, and we have the Italian opening. Knight f6, d3, and now the move h6, which prevents white from ever playing this move knight g5. But we get to see a relatively calm opening. I say relatively because it will explode very soon. c3, d6, a4. White is grabbing some space on the queen side, and black plays here the move g6 with the idea that the bishop can be developed to g7. a5, black is stopping the pawn from getting any further. Castling kingside, bishop g7, knight bd2, both sides are developing their pieces, and white played here the move rook e1. Up to here, some Grandmaster games have been played with this exact position, doesn't matter too much. White has a bit more space on the queen side, but black is looking for ways, maybe later, to try to open up the king side, launch an attack there. Let's see what's happening. Bartel played here the move knight h7. And here Hans goes for the move queen b3. What is he planning to do? Is he really trying to win this pawn? Well, the pawn is pinned, but how is black going to cope with that? He's not really able to advance the pawn yet. Well, Bartel has his own ideas. A very creative solution for this problem is just moving the king into the corner, allowing white to take that pawn on f7. The queen is still protecting the bishop. But taking such a pawn, is it just a pawn? Or you're helping black to build up the initiative along the f-file? The queen comes into f6 to attack the bishop. The bishop has to go back. Black is a pawn down and comes into action right away with the move g5, intending to come one square further to g4 to kick the knight, after which the pawn on f2 is in big trouble. So white played here this move, rook e2, g4 played. Now the knight can go back to e1. Everything is still under control, but black is just building up the game very slowly. With the move h5, he's further initiating some kingside expansion. White plays here the move knight f1, so the bishop is also about to get into play, and black continues here with the plan of h4. So the pawns are really far advanced and ready to open up white's kingside anytime. Queen d1 was played. That's maybe a very passive move, but white is just trying to hold its position together. And, well, how should black proceed here? Well, definitely there are attacking ideas on the king side. There's an open f-file. But Bartel decides, okay, I need to use all my pieces. So he brings the knight from c6 to e7 with the plan of coming to g6 very soon. Well, white played here the move queen d2. So the queen is controlling this diagonal. Not possible for black to activate this bishop anytime via h6. That could have been done a few moves earlier, but okay, it didn't happen. And well, black comes up with this idea to play here the move c6. Frankly speaking, I felt this was a little bit a strange idea, as with this move, black is about to open up the center. But I don't think you want to open up the center. That may actually help white to entangle. Anyway, let's have a look. What white does now also surprised me, because Hans played here this move, g3. Why on earth does he voluntarily weaken his king side? Well, he wants to clarify the situation. Maybe after black would ever take on g3 and white recaptures, the h-file is open, and really far away, white may be able to use the h-file. I don't think that's what Hans is really thinking about. It's very unlikely to happen. But black also has ideas now to play a move like h3 at some point. Maybe not now, but with the pawn on h3, there are always mating threats in the air. Black goes here for the move d5, attacking the bishop. Bishop goes back to b3, and now the bishop comes out to e6. So finally, black's development has been completed. But what should white do here? Well, various options, but definitely this move, d4, opening up the center. That's the way to go, with the point that if you do take, there's e5, attacking the queen. And if the queen goes away, you can take back with the pawn, and white is grabbing some space so the pieces can maneuver a bit better. Anyway, also this didn't happen. White played the move knight g2. Now we understand Hans' idea. He wanted to get his knight there to attack this pawn. Black played here this move, knight to g6. So the knight is protecting the pawn on h4. White captures on d5. Black does take back. Now the position is very dynamical. With nice pawns in the center, they can be moved anytime soon. Maybe White can even take the pawn on h4, but okay, it's not very obvious that that should help White at all. White instead played here this move, d4, challenging this pawn on e5. Black advances the pawn to e4. Very interesting idea, grabbing more space, but also now White has possibilities to get some grip on these light squares. If he would have played here the move queen e1, Hans had a very good possibility now to put a knight on f4, and in case of knight takes f4, the bishop can recapture. Didn't happen. Hans had a different plan. He wanted to get a rook into play. That's also very interesting because look, this is a nice idea behind White's early queenside expansion. The a-pawn is far advanced and the rook can be activated via b4, attacking the pawn on b7. Black goes h3, attacking the knight. And the knight went back to e1. Now we may not understand exactly what Hans had been thinking about, but at least he's still having control over the f3 square, not allowing the queen coming into f3. Black played here queen f7, just waiting. Maybe the f6 square can be used for the bishop, or maybe the knight at some point. And also the pawn on b7 is protected. White continues with the move rook b4. Well, the pawn is defended, as I said. And here, I think one very clever idea could be here just to play bishop f6 with the idea to come to d8, to attack the pawn on a5, and the rook can never really come to b6 because of bishop d8. Now, this didn't happen. Rook c8 on the board, and now I think rook b6 is just a very good move. Also, this was not played. What is the idea? Well, if black is careless, let's say a move like bishop f6, now it's time for rook takes e4, guys. D takes e4 is met by bishop takes e6. White has won a second pawn. He will take back the exchange on the next move. That's the idea of rook b6, and therefore black was advised to play here the move bishop f6 first. Anyway, didn't happen. Rook ac8, bishop went back to c2, and now the bishop comes to f6, queen to d1. White is just maneuvering but not having a very clear plan. Bishop d8, attacking the pawn on a5. Of course, you can just go back with your rook to protect the pawn, but then probably black continues with something like knight g5, and the knight is on its way to f3. The bishop is doing a fantastic job attacking the pawn on a5, supporting the g5 square as well. Anyway, let's have a look. Bishop h6. The bishop is finally brought into play. Hits the rook, and I think this is a very nice idea because here we see that you need to force the rook to leave the f-file. If not, there is always some pressure against the pawn on f2. Here, rook g8 was played. Maybe rook e8 is even a bit better to overprotect the pawn on e4. Not obvious. After rook g8, white played this move, c4. Very nice idea. Now the point is that after something like bishop takes a5, the rook could just go away. And now you don't have to fear this move, bishop takes e1, because there is rook takes e1 and everything is still well protected. Now you understand, had the rook been on f8, there could have followed queen takes f2. Back to this position after the move c4. Black decided not to take the pawn on a5. And okay, that's a possibility, but you should understand that thanks to this move c4, black's center is about to collapse. So black needs to act now. Played here this move, bishop g5. Bishops are coming off the board and the knight is soon landing on f3. We would expect knight to e3. So the knight is now also guarding the g2 square. And now, the big moment of the game changer. Black played here this move, knight h4. This may come as a huge shocker. It's a knight sacrifice. G takes h4, knight f3. Check. If you do take the knight, it's g takes f3. The rook is hanging. There's a devastating mating attack along the g file. So white should not take that knight on f3. King h1 was played. Now one problem is that you would like to play queen f4, but then the knight stops the mating threat on h2. Everything is covered, white is a piece up. So what is Bartel's idea here? He has sacrificed one piece, but look what's happening here. Knight takes h2. second knight sacrifice of the game. And this is just leading to insane complications. If you would take that knight on h2, it's queen f4 check, king to h1, and black's idea is to play g3. He's just totally risking its entire position, but maybe he had no choice, otherwise he was just a pawn down. Here, this is a total mess. This didn't happen because Hans said, well, I don't want to accept that. That looks too dangerous to me. He said, okay, I'm going to take on d5 here first. This is going to be very interesting intermediate move, hoping to distract black's pieces from what they want to do. But look, this bishop is hanging. What is the move Bartel played? Not a bishop move, but he played here g3. He continues with the attack. Now white just captures the bishop on e6 and the pawn even comes to g2, guys. The board is set on fire, and what should white do? There are not many options. It's a check. You have to solve the check. If you do take the knight, black gets a new queen. That's simply impossible. If you do move your king to g1, then it's queen f4 with a devastating mating attack, because the knight will come back to g4, and there are all sorts of ideas like h2, and well, the G file will be opened very soon. It's a crushing mating attack. Also, if you just take on G2, you have to be very precise. In the game, Hans found the best move. Knight from E3 captures on G2. But how about taking with the other knight? Well, then it's H takes G2. If the king blocks, it's knight f3 with checkmate. That's not possible. You got to take the knight in that case. But then it's queen f4, king G1, queen takes H4, threatening checkmate. If you do eliminate the pawn on g2, the main attacker is rook takes g2, king takes, rook g8, king f1, queen h1, checkmate. That's an easy line for these guys. Back to the game. Knight 3 takes the pawn on g2. H takes g2. And here again, the knight cannot be taken because of promotion. The knight on e1 prevents the queen from covering the back rank. So after sacrificing the first knight, king goes back to g1. Queen f4. The queen is coming in. And what's happening here? Rook takes e4, attacking the queen. And look now, we have seen so many brilliant ideas already, but this one will come as a surprise to you at least. Queen takes f2, queen sacrifice. King takes f2, g1 queen. Black is getting a new queen. He is just only a piece down. The king is wide open, but it looks as if white has a lot of defenders surrounding the king. Now, there are not many good checks. That's actually the difficult thing. The king is about to escape to d2 or maybe even to d3, or depends. There are still a lot of pieces which can interfere against any check. Look at this, knight f1. The knight is coming into action. This is just totally insane position. What is the idea? Maybe something like rook g3, maybe rook e3 can be played at some point. Now there are various ways of playing. One very cool idea is here the move d5. Was not played. But the idea is that if you do give a check on h2, this is the idea behind knight f1, you cannot take on f1 because of rook g1 mate. But here, the king can go to d3, and after a rook check, the king hides on d4, and there are no good checks. White will win the game with a few precise moves. Didn't happen. White played here queen c1. So the idea is to threaten checkmate on h6. Very understandable. Look at this, rook g2. It's a rook sacrifice. If you do take the rook, it's knight g3 with a check, attacking the queen, and you have some very big problems. So better don't enter this line. Hans played here the move king d1. Everything is under control. Do you think? Well, let's see. Rook c takes c2. My gosh, what's this? There is a possible check on h6 still. The rook can be taken. Anything is possible. In the game, Hans panicked. He took with the queen on c2, but that's not a good move. Should be clear also though that if you do take with a knight on c2, then it's knight e3 with double check, and that's mate. So that's also not possible. But how about giving this check? Queen h6, just ignoring the threat. King g8, and now still you cannot take with the knight because of that mating pattern. But if you do advance your pawn, white is also threatening checkmate, and apparently there's no good way for black to proceed. There's no good knight check, no queen check. If you give a check on e3 with a knight, you can just take it. If you do give a check with a rook, it's queen takes, rook takes, king c1. And white is a queen versus a rook down, but his pawn is about to promote. So eventually this is just going to be winning for white. Was not played by Hans. Big missed opportunity. He took with the queen on c2. Rook takes c2. And now he took with the knight on c2. Knight e3, king d2. Queen f2 check, king d3. If you do take with the queen on c2, it's king takes e3. And it's two rooks versus a queen with a very strong passed pawn. Should be winnable for white. Knight takes c2. So the game goes on. The rook is hanging. But what is happening here? Rook is hanging with check, actually. White played here d5. He may have moved the rook, taking a pawn on b7. And now, if you do play queen f3, look at this. The king goes away because you don't want that queen takes e4 comes with check. Now, you're having a queen and a knight versus a rook, but the e-pawn is really strong. You're threatening rook b8 followed by e8 queen. And white is holding. Black can give a number of checks, but it's a draw apparently. If you ever take on b7 with a queen, it's e8 queen, and okay, white has many pawns, black has not enough material to convert. So let's see, d5 was played. Very interesting. Knight takes b4, rook takes b4. Now it's queen versus a rook and a number of pawns, and these pawns are very strong. Queen c5, rook d4. White's protecting this pawn. Now if you do take that pawn on a5, it's totally irrelevant. The e-pawn is too strong. d6 can be played next, and white is absolutely safe. Queen d6, blocking the pawns, very important. And now white played here this move, king e4. But I think Hans is choosing the wrong plan. King e4 is maybe still possible. After king g7, the king is coming closer. But now Hans is trying to activate the rook. What he should do is this. Play the move h5. It's not that you're going anywhere with this pawn, but it's just to keep the king far away from your connected passed pawns. The point is that if king goes to h6, you move the king. Then black will probably take at some point the pawn. And now you do this. Rook e4, guys. This is so important technique because you need to threaten to move your pawn forward. The d-pawn cannot really be taken because then there's e7 and, well, it's enough to save the game. White could have saved it here, but Hans played rook d3. Queen h2. And now, okay, there are various ways to play here. Many possibilities. Queen e2 is an idea. You just got to think that black really wants to blockade the pawns with its king. So rook c3, queen takes h4, check, king f5, queen h5, king goes back, queen h4, king f5. No repetition because the queen comes back to h2 to prevent the check and to cover the d6 square. King e4, king g6. Nice move. King is safe there. Rook c8, queen d6. The queen is blockading the pawns. Rook c2, queen g3. What is black exactly doing? Well, maybe that's not clear yet. Rook c8, and now he would like to come closer with the king. But if you do that, then white is able to play rook f8, put a rook on f7, and now it's much more difficult to wrap up these central pawns. So black is not in a rush. Played here king g7. There's no good check because the queen is a fantastic defender. King d4, queen f4 check. Now the king cannot come to the c file because of a check on c1, and you pick up the rook on c8. After the move king d3, the queen comes back to d6 to attack the pawn on d5. King c4, king f6. Now the king is coming closer and you're about to play king e5 and just win the pawn on d5 and then the pawn on e6. That's an easy win. So the rook comes over to the other side just to be ready to give checks from the side. Queen c7 check, king d4, queen g7 with tempo hitting the rook. Rook goes back to h1, and now finally this king comes over to block the pawn on d6. King c5, white is trying to prevent the king from coming there. And now, interesting moment. You can take the pawn on b2, but maybe rook h7 feels a little bit annoying. You don't want to get a check there. So look what Bartel did. Very fine technique here by the Polish grandmaster. Queen g6. He just prevents a rook check on h7 and threatens to come in to c2. With check, after which the pawn on b2 can be taken, and very soon the other pawns will be collected. Rook c1, queen d3, with the idea of giving a check on b5, and then again the pawns are about to drop. Rook c4, queen e3, very good move. Now, if the king goes to the only square, there's queen d2, and everything is just hanging. White will be forced to give up at least one of its pawns. Therefore, rook d4 was played, but now it's queen c1 with check. And if you go to b6, well, it's queen takes b2, with check double attack. If you come back to protect your rook, it's going to be checkmate on b5. Hans played here rook c4, but now the pawn can be taken and there's no counterplay. There's not something like a threat or a rook check on the 7th rank. So black showed that he was absolutely not in a hurry, and this patience gets rewarded now. Rook e4, queen b5, king d4, and black has time to take this other pawn. So now it's just material even, at least talking about pawns, but it's queen versus rook, and these pawns are going to drop soon as well. The final attempt here could be something like d6 with a point that if king takes, you can run with your pawn, but the simplest way here is just to play queen d2 check. King c4, queen d5, double attack, king goes away, you take the rook and you control the promotion square. So there are always these sort of tactics, mate, double attacks, ideas to win a pawn or even more. So white played here king e5, but after queen c7, king f5 here, Hans just made his move, and probably he felt like, what I'm doing here is just completely lost. Every move is winning. Black can run with his pawns, he can block with the king, just give a number of checks, maybe even give up the queen for the rook and the 2 pawns. There are various ways to win this. So Hans, after playing his own move, he just resigned. What an absolute drama happening here in this tournament in London. Hans losing 2 games in a row. What's happening with him? That's of course what's kind of normal when you play a lot of tournaments in a row. This can happen when you play some of the very best players in the world. Let me know your thoughts on this game. Make sure to subscribe to this channel. And very soon more coverage of Hans's journey in Europe.